is cultivate our motivation. At the time of the Buddha, different people became interested in his teachings for a whole diversity of reasons. Some of them may have heard a teaching he gave, or a teaching one of his disciples gave, or even a short phrase the Buddha uttered. Some people were attracted to his energy, how they felt when they were in his presence. Some people by his form, his body, because it was a manifestation of his inner qualities. So think for a minute, what was it for you that really attracted you to the Buddha and made you want to listen to the teachings? And then build upon what it was that first attracted you. And as you build upon that, bring in compassion for all living beings and a wish to benefit them in the highest way by leading them on the path to awakening. And therefore, needing to attain awakening ourselves first. And so form a strong determination to do that, no matter how long it takes, no matter the obstacles you encounter. So I'm curious, what was it that attracted you? What hooked you in? Mm-hmm.
His peacefulness.
The expression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the Four Noble Truths, and then also the statement, don't believe everything that I said, but test it out for yourself. That was huge.
The Buddhist teachings seemed to be like instructions on how to develop a more loving heart.
What really first struck me was the qualities of his disciples of the Sangha, and meeting them and seeing that they were kind and caring and intelligent and quite happy.
The people you met, the living people, yeah.
Similar to Venerable Rinchen, it was more through the practitioners alive now that connected me, and the teachers and their example of living, their kindness and joy. Much more vivid than at first the Buddha, because it was more the human being in front of me that was the example that I could connect to. And the idea, the truth of cessation, the idea that there is a state where the mental suffering that I'm experiencing now isn't there, and that idea really hooked me.
After spending a lot of the first part of my life really in love with reading about saints and holy people, and they had these experiences, but there was never any explanation on how you got there. You know, how to be a good person, how to have these deep understandings of whatever. So to finally meet a teacher that explained it real clearly, this is what I found, this is how you get there, this is the problem. I mean, it really took all the mystery out of, any type of spirituality I'd ever been in. You know, all the magical thinking got to be addressed, all the confusion.
I think certainly the truth of suffering, that things that everybody's saying this and this and this brings happiness, but it doesn't. That made a lot of sense. And then also just surprise, I think, by cutting through things we're holding on to. Like, because you're holding on to something and then they say something completely different, and so that made me curious.
Love Buddha because he's a great scientist, a great engineer that know how to solve problems, especially the problem from our mind, even though that is just general, but you can customize according to your needs.
You'd be a very good salesman. You talk in exactly the right language, you know. Okay, so it's interesting, isn't it, to see what it is that how we first got involved, yeah, and it's different for everybody. You know, things affect us differently, but there was always something that brought us in and made us want to learn more. And so it was also during the Buddhist time, you know, as he walked from place to place, teaching whoever showed up, you know. I shouldn't say it like whoever showed up, like he would say, I'm teaching, and then the people come. It was, he would come and people would see him and his disciples, and then they would request teachings. And so he would teach in response to the request, and then other people would come to that. Yeah. So that is very much the Buddhist philosophy. We don't go out and proselytize, you know, and try and convert people, or present ourselves as, here I am if you want to invite me to teach. You know, the Buddha didn't do that, but rather, you know, the Buddha somehow by his living example, and also as people began to hear about him more, people got attracted, and then the requests were made. So it was always in response to requests. Yeah, the Buddha didn't put himself forward. He didn't, you know, try and become a superstar. So that, I think that's a very good example for us. You know, being a Buddhist practitioner is not about being a superstar. It's not about creating an image. It's not about creating a following and then therefore thinking that we are very important. Yeah, that kind of attitude, actually, somebody mentioned yesterday, kind of that monastic life becoming like a career. So if you have a career, you want to, you know, go up the ranks, and you want more status and more publicity and more fanfare, and you want your name to be known to a wider group of people, and then that infiltrates how we relate to people. Yeah, it infiltrates our attitude when we meet people. Yesterday I spoke a little bit about when we just see people as dollar bills, and you know, we're interested in how much offering that they can give us. And that's a big problem for the lay teachers, yeah, because yeah, they're teaching and they have a family to support. Their kids want the latest shoes. They want to go to summer camp. Their spouses want nice clothes and a good vacation. And so when those teachers, you know, teach, sometimes they really look at which groups, which places, which people give the most dana, and then they choose who they're going to teach according to that. That's not the way the Buddha did it. Okay? So we need to be careful about that, wanting offerings. And then another one is wanting praise, wanting reputation. Yeah. So we want to be known as the this or that of whatever it is, whatever position you have in the monastery you're at, whatever educational position you have, whatever, how many people know about you, and does your reputation precede you, all of this kind of stuff. Yeah. And so looking for that also by being a monastic is not the way the Buddha did it. And these two things, seeking offerings and reputation and praise, when we look at the Bodhisattva vow, these two are the first root Bodhisattva vow, having to do with praising self and belittling others, regarding reputation and offerings. So you can see, what a threat that is to pure Dharma practice, and how we have to be quite careful about that. It's similar whether you are teaching or maybe you're a translator, seeking reputation, seeking offerings. Maybe you're the teacher's attendant. Oh, then you know everybody, and so you have all sorts of perks through all the connections you have. So all of these kinds of things are not proper monastic motivations. They're not proper Dharma practitioner motivations, whether you're monastic or lay. Yeah. So being a monastic is not a career. Yeah, it's not a career choice. It's a lifestyle, and it's about what kind of person do you want to be, and what kind of lifestyle will help you become the kind of person you want to be. So it's not about being recognized and being famous and collecting a lot of offerings and, know when you go somewhere that everybody's saying, oh, look, there's so-and-so, oh. It's not about that. But it's definitely, the 8 worldly dharmas are hard to leave behind. We know what they are. We see their disadvantages. And we think we see the benefits of them. Or maybe we don't even think that way, that we see the benefits of them. But emotionally, we have some craving, we have some hole inside of ourselves that we want to be filled by the external world and external people. That the wish, because it's interesting when you think about how when we die, one of the biggest fears is that we're going to cease to exist. Yeah. So this is just talking ordinary, self-grasping person, that we're going to cease to exist. That everything we know is going to disappear. So how do we overcome that? We think if we fortify ourselves with enough possessions, enough reputation, enough praise, enough people saying that we're fantastic, that all of that goes to reaffirm that, yes, there is a truly existent me. Yeah. And we don't want to give up that truly existent me because we think that that's who we are. Okay, I can give up my body. Okay, I can give up my attitudes. I can give up my mind. I can give up my possessions. But me, that clinging just to me does not want to be given up. So we fortify it in whatever way we can. Yeah. And so that's where making a career of being a practitioner comes in. Because you're known, you are special, you are appreciated, you have a reputation. People give you stuff. So you must be somebody. Okay. So, these very deep-seated, the deep-seated grasping is quite deep. Yeah, it's quite deep. And when you start to look at it, you shake a bit. Like, well, no, it's not actually like that. I give up this, I give up that, But yeah, this clinging of just the idea I, the notion I. Okay, so yeah, that's something to be aware of. Okay, so I actually, yesterday, like I said, I wanted to talk about, how the Dharma teaching spread. So maybe I'll get around to that today. So, they spread as the Buddha went around and taught to these different groups, and then people said they wanted to ordain. And so the Sangha started in that way. People heard the teachings, they were captivated by it. They said, I want to ordain, and the Buddha started out by saying, Come, O Bhikshu, and that was it. He also started having lay followers and giving them the 5 precepts. And so you have the development of the fourfold assembly, male and female upasikas, upasakas, people who have the 5 precepts, and then bhikshus and bhikshunis. Then you go, well, wait a minute, what about the shramaneras and shramaneris? Where do they fit? Yeah, what about the shikshamanas? They aren't the lay people. They aren't the fully ordained. The shramanera ordination came about because there were young children who were ordaining. And, they couldn't really keep the discipline very well. So they would cry at night, and they would get upset and they would, have temper tantrums and all. So the Buddha set up the shramanera ordination with 10 precepts because that would be easier for the children to keep. And then for the shikshamana, there's a lot of different theories about why the Buddha set that up. And this is what makes that ordination, it's sometimes difficult to understand. Some people say it's you have it to determine, because it's a 2-year period, whether a woman is pregnant or not, because you don't want somebody to ordain who's pregnant and then she has the baby and she's nursing the baby and she's supposed to be celibate, and maybe she is because she got ordained after having the baby, but all the other people look at her and say, So that's not so good. And then also if you're going on Pindapat, they didn't have nice, comfortable backpacks for your babies. You had to carry them with you or tie them onto you. It was pretty inconvenient. So some people say it was to make sure that a woman wasn't pregnant. But why is it 2 years? Nobody is pregnant for 2 years minus 1 day. Yeah. So it's a little funny on that account. It could have been shorter. Yeah. So, and then other people say it was to see if women really had the strength to endure that. But I mean, if 500 of them walked from Kapilavastu barefoot to Vesali, I think that shows something. Yeah. So, so that's a bit of a puzzle, but these different levels of ordinations came into existence. At first, the Buddha just taught the three baskets. This is how it's said. That he taught the three baskets: the Vinaya basket, which is the monastic discipline, yeah, the sutra basket, which is the sutras and talks about meditation, and the Abhidharma basket, which is about knowledge. And so each of the three baskets, the Vinaya basket correlates with the higher training in ethical conduct, the Sutra basket with the higher training in concentration, and the Abhidharma with the higher training in wisdom. Okay. It doesn't mean that a sutra of any of those particular, or I should say a discourse or a text on any of those three is only about that topic. Yeah, it's not, because the Prajnaparamita sutras belong to the sutra basket, but they talk about emptiness. Yeah, but because they talk about meditation on emptiness, they're put in that particular basket. So the Vinaya basket, as how it grew up, well, just briefly, the Buddha, he started giving people precepts. And for the first 12 years let me start over here. He ordained people, by saying, "Kamo bhikshu," or whatever. And for the first 12 years, there were no precepts. But then some of the monks started acting in inappropriate ways. And so each precept of the full ordination arose because of somebody's bad behavior. Okay, so it wasn't like the Buddha started out and said, okay, I'm going to have a Sangha, and here are the rules. There's 4 of these, 10 of these, 17 of these, said it all nice, all out, and you have to promise you're going to follow all of these, raise your right hand, and, and swear that you're going to follow all of these, and then you're ordained. No. Okay. Each precept arose because of a specific occurrence, so this is real life evolution. Okay. So let's just leave that for a minute. Yeah. Then the sutras were the general discourses that the Buddha gave, where he was talking about the path to awakening. Okay, the 37 practice for 37 harmonies with awakening, which includes the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the Eightfold Path, and so on. Okay, and then so the Buddha taught those. Yeah, so, although sometimes in some sutras, one of his disciples taught the sutra, and then the Buddha reaffirmed it afterwards. The Abhidharma basket, it appears, and there's a whole lot of different views about how the Abhidharma basket originated. A few people say the Buddha taught it when he was on earth. Some people say that the Buddha taught during the Varsa time, the rains, summer rains retreat time, that he went to the heaven of the 33 gods. He taught the Abhidharma texts there. Shariputra listened to them, or no, the Buddha came down every evening, told what he had taught to the gods to Shariputra, and then Shariputra, made it into an oral text that was passed down. Other people say that different sages in the early years all spoke different parts, and then those things got put together to form the different Abhidharma texts. What's interesting is the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, well, not the whole Sanskrit tradition, the Sravastivada branch, of the Sanskrit and the Pali tradition. They both have 7 Abhidharma texts, but the texts are different. So the same number, but the texts are different. And then, of course, with all the texts in all 3 baskets, people started discussing them and writing commentaries on them. So you got the development of treatises and commentaries. So commentaries might take a specific text and go through it and explain all the words in the commentary, explain all the concepts and the meaning of the commentary. And then you had treatises, which would be written on a specific topic, and the author would draw in points from different texts about that topic to make the treatise on whatever it was. So you had the development of treatises in the Sanskrit tradition, that happened mostly in northern India, and the development of the treatises in South India that then spread to Sri Lanka. And then there were also ancient sages in Sri Lanka who wrote various treatises and commentaries. Buddhaghosa lived in the 5th century AD, so actually, rather late in terms of that goes, how that is, but he is one of the most well-known and respected of the Pali commentators, and some of his texts are translated into English. But in all 3 baskets, commentaries continued to be written in different countries in different languages, and it's still happening now, because ideas develop, different points are raised, and so the sages comment on these things. And so when we start our monastic education, or your education in general in the Dharma, what you want to learn is what the great masters taught. Okay? So, in the Pali tradition, and also in the Chinese tradition, they would take the texts that the Buddha himself spoke and study those, because and then write commentaries on them. But Buddhism went to China, Sri Lanka, the Theravada countries, centuries earlier than it went to Tibet. So by the time it got to Tibet, there were these Indian sages who had written fantastic treatises and commentaries on the sutras, on the Abhidharma, on the Vinaya. And so people really started studying these commentaries and treatises, and then writing their own commentaries and treatises to flesh out the meanings in the ones of the Indian commentators. And then Buddhism comes to the West, and people, I don't know, we're not following any particular system, it seems like. So there's a lot of translations, there's a lot of, people writing all sorts of stuff. I haven't really thought much about how to systematize that, But there's a lot of things being published. And when I came to Buddhism, there was hardly anything. There was Lobsang Rampa, who was, I found out later, was an Irish plumber, and he made up these fantastic super duper stories about Tibet and wrote them down. And people, he took a Tibetan name, so people thought his writings were authentic. then there was, yes, Alexandra David Neal, who actually went to Tibet, but she was really interested in the exotica. So she wrote a lot about that kind of stuff. Then there was Lama Govinda, who also went, where did he go? I never was attracted much to his stuff, so I didn't learn much about him. Anybody remember? Okay, anyway, so there was his stuff. And there was this book that Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa put together called The Wish-Fulfilling Golden Sun. I wish I had the copy from my first meditation course. It was this, mimeographed book, kind of put together somehow, and with the outlines of and little bits about each of the Lamrim meditations and the Lamrim topics, for those of you who've seen it. And, Lama Zopa had been learning English at this school that Frida Beatty, thank you, Venerable Palmo, yeah, that she set up. She set up a school for the young incarnate lamas. So he had been learning English there. And one of the ways he learned English was he just took out the dictionary and, it must have been the Chandra Das dictionary. That was about the only one available at that time. He would see a word in Tibetan and then look at the different English words and choose one, something, and then use that. And so sometimes you got kind of strange translations, yeah. And some of them, if you're like me, who's really sensitive to different words, rankled you, like wrong views. Okay, I could endure wrong views or distorted views. But when that was translated as heresy, that was too much for me. You can't say heresy. It's because when you hear heresy, what do you think? They're burning you at the stake because you believe something. So that. Yeah. So there were some interesting translations like that. Now there's so many books, yeah. But when I started, there was very little, and so we really had to rely on our teachers. We didn't rely on books because there were very, Lobsang Rampa could only take you so far. Like the first line on the table of contents, and then it's like, yeah. But I used to read all these books because that's what there was. Thank goodness I've forgotten what I read. Yeah. But we really relied on our teachers. That's how we learned. And so, when there were teachings, we went to the teachings. When our teacher went somewhere to teach, we followed along and we went. And we listened and we took notes. And people were just beginning to record teachings. Yeah. So I remember my first course I went to, I had just gotten, these old clunky tape recorders? Do you remember them with the buttons here and the noise came out here, and the people who had really nice tape recorders had the big ones with the big round tapes. I had the smaller ones with the tapes that often got stuck. Yeah, but yeah, so it was just starting to do that and starting to transcribe. But that was the only way to learn then. And I see now how it is different, because I see people now that learn by books, and how that was how that's very different than those of us who learn directly from our teachers. Yeah. What I see now is a lot of times people value what is written in a book more than they value what they hear from their teacher. Yeah. Which I find rather strange because my whole education was from my teachers, often through translators, which varied in their ability to translate. So you really had to listen carefully. You had to really think about things. You had to discuss it with your friends to figure out what was actually being said. Yeah. And so that was quite important to us, When we had questions, we discussed or we went and asked our teacher. Now people say, oh, somebody's giving a talk, that's nice. As long as they're amusing and they make me laugh, I'll go and listen, but I'm really going to learn from reading books. Yeah. Well, my teacher says if that agrees with what's written in the book, then I'll believe it. But if what my teacher says doesn't agree with what's written in the book, and sometimes the books are translations of texts, sometimes they are transcriptions of oral teachings, and sometimes people check the transcriptions and they check the translations, and sometimes they don't check them so well. Okay, but it really creates a very different feeling, I think, for those of us who relied on our teachers, because that was, they were the entrance to everything for us. And, when you read a book, it's good to read. I think it's good if people study and read books. But often people read this and that and this and that and the other thing, and they'll grab whatever has a jazzy title. Yeah. And then often they'll get confused. And especially now that things about Tantra are published, it may even say in the beginning of the book, this is only for people who've had the empowerment. But, some new person who's interested in Buddhism, they have this interesting looking deity on the front, with many hands and many arms and, a strange color. And oh, yeah, I want that. Tibetan Buddhism is supposed to be about magic and mysticism, and, I want to read about that. And, they get horribly confused. Yeah, they have a hard time putting it all together. Anyway, that's a little bit about the three baskets. As time went on, and the Buddha told his followers to go out in different directions and, live their mendicant life. And if people requested teachings, then out of compassion for the welfare of all beings, they should give the teachings and explain the Dharma. So ancient India didn't have great transportation system. It was basically your feet that got you from one place to another. There were no telephones, no internet, no smartphones, maybe there were smoke signals or something like that. But so as people went in different directions, the tradition was carried on orally. People would memorize the different Vinaya texts and then repeat them orally. And that's how everybody learned, by listening to their teacher and memorizing the words that their teacher recited so that they would know the teachings by heart. Nowadays we don't do that. And it's interesting because now in the monasteries, if you are good at memorization, it is seen as an indication that you're very bright and intelligent. In the West, somebody who can memorize, people go, nah. That's not so important. What's important is if you know how to find the answer, through library research or internet research or whatever it is. So that's valued in the West, knowing how to find it rather than having it in your mind by memory. That's a big change. And considering that everything was passed down orally, and you had people going in multiple directions, then, once in a while, something would change in the recitation. They started out, I'm sure when the Buddha spoke, he didn't say exactly the same words in every single sutra when he was talking about a specific topics. But what happened was the Banakas, these were the specific monastics who were the ones who memorized and passed down the tradition orally. Sometimes what the Banakas would always do is standardize passages so that when the Buddha talked about this topic, they would have a standard passage, even though I'm sure the Buddha didn't say the exact words every time. But so all the sutras on that topic, when he talked about that specific topic, would have the same passage. Okay, and that made it easy to memorize, and it established some kind of consistency in terms of what each Vinaka was reciting. But of course, as we all know from, being a human being, is sometimes when we're reciting, we may accidentally say something wrong. Not wrong, but something different. Yeah. And so, sometimes there's variations in texts because of this. And when you get people who live on opposite sides, because, Buddhism spread, to Afghanistan in the West, and then to China in the East, and down to Southeast Asia and Indonesia in the South, and up to Mongolia, and Buryatia in the North, then you're going to get some variety in the sutras, and also as the Dharma spread in different places, different sutras would appeal to different people, and different points within sutras would appeal to different people. So what you began to have over time is the formation of different traditions. So they say that in the early days after the Buddha passed away, there were 18 schools that gradually developed throughout India and the other areas. And it's interesting to read the list of the 18 schools, because they're often divided with 4 major ones and then different minor ones under each major one, and different ways of categorizing them that are all different. And the names of the 18 schools in all the different ways that different traditions list the 18 schools are not always the same. Okay? And so this often had to do with when the teachings came to that particular place. Okay? So in South Asia, around Sri Lanka and Thailand and so on, because Buddhism went there quite early on, within 3 centuries of when the Buddha lived, that's a long time actually, but it's considered early on. King Ashoka sent his son and then his daughter to Sri Lanka, and that's how the Vinaya tradition spread. The ordination of the fully ordained monks and nuns spread to Sri Lanka. Yeah, it was through his son and daughter, and then all of their, a whole group of fully ordained bhikshus and fully ordained bhikshunis going to those places. Yeah, so that's how the Vinaya spread, and the Dharma teachings too. And so the Pali tradition often says, well, we hold the original Dharma, that what the Buddha said. But it's actually because, when you think about the systematized parts in the sutras, it's hard to say, well, the Buddha always said that the same way, so we have the exact words of the Buddha. And, there's also different sutras and different canons in the Theravada tradition. And then sometimes the Theravada people say, well, and Western scholars too, they say, well, the Mahayana people invented afterwards. The Buddha didn't teach it. It was, people writing their own things and marketing it as the Buddha's words. Nagarjuna was very opposed to that. He, in Precious Garland, those of you who studied it remember, he spent many verses refuting the idea that the Mahayana was not the Buddha's teachings. Yeah. And in writing the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, what really came out to me when I started learning more about Theravada and Chinese Buddhism and all, is that you have ideas that were presented in the Pali tradition, and the Mahayana teachings elaborated on those ideas. So it wasn't like the Mahayana started introducing ideas that were totally foreign to Buddhism. Okay? It looks to me like what happened is picking out certain things and elaborating them. Okay? So, for example, in the Pali tradition and also in the Mahayana tradition, one object for generating concentration is the four immeasurables: love, compassion, joy, equanimity. Yeah? So those are common to the Sanskrit and the Pali traditions. Well, where did bodhicitta come from? Yeah. If you take compassion and love and equanimity and joy and expand the meanings of them and expand, and develop a system of how you meditate on them step by step, then you come up with the traditions to develop bodhicitta. Okay? So one tradition, the equalizing, exchanging self for others, that Shantideva taught, he was 8th century. That was already pretty late. But if you look, it relies completely on, it's an elaboration, an extension of the ideas that were first presented in the four measurables. Okay? And equalize, and the 7-point cause and effect tradition, I think it was Atisha who started that. Yeah, and he was 10th century, early 11th century. So, but when both of these traditions arose later, they often said, well, it's founded on Nagarjuna. And Nagarjuna, well, who knows what century Nagarjuna was. It says he lived 6 centuries, 600 years. And, he first appeared in the 2nd century AD. But then, the modern scholars say, and His Holiness also isn't quite convinced that he lived 600 years. That there could be many people named Nagarjuna. And similarly with Vasubandhu, yeah, you have different texts authored by Vasubandhu that are sometimes teach things that are very different. Well, there could, how many people named Susan and John do we have? Yeah? So it could be that there's many people just with the same name. Yeah. Okay. So the main point is the teachings got spread, and the core always remained the same, but different words might change, different emphasis might change, yeah, and also the customs would change, yeah, in the customs, and also how you kept the precepts, those would change, because people are living in different climates and different cultures. Okay, so you get this whole variety of Buddhist traditions nowadays. And then, of course, within any one country, what we might say Theravada Buddhism. And by the way, the term Theravada didn't come about until, when was that? I don't know, like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th century AD. So it wasn't like it was even called Theravada when it was in Sri Lanka at the beginning. They had three main traditions in Sri Lanka: the Abhayagiri, the Mahavihara, and the Amaravati. Yeah? So those were three monasteries or monastic groups in Sri Lanka, in the early days. And the Abhayagiri and Amaravati ones had a lot of Mahayana influence, because people from India would take the Mahayana down, and so you would find, all sorts of Mahayana influence, and even Tantra with different deities. And then a king, and I think it was maybe around the 12th, no, somewhere after at least a millennia. It was at least in the year 1000, but I think maybe later. Anyway, he favored the Mahavihara tradition. So he said, everybody has to be Mahavihara. So Abhayagiri and Amaravati people, you either convert and become Mahavihara tradition monks, or you disrobe. Okay, because he wanted to systematize things. Yeah. So it's very interesting when you think of how things are spreading and different people going in different places, and that you didn't have people who lived very far apart coming together and having international Buddhist conferences. Yeah. And they didn't know anything about each other except what was passed down orally. And, everybody wants their tradition to be the best and the most inclusive of all the Buddhist teachings and the purest of all teachings, right? So every tradition kind of, because why would you believe something second rate? Nobody wants to believe the second rate tradition. Our tradition is always the best, most complete, highest teachings. But they never met each other. So what got passed down sometimes was just rumors and misconceptions. And some of those rumors and misconceptions exist today, unfortunately. Okay, as does the tendency for everybody to say, my tradition is the best one, and my teacher is the best, and my this is the best, and my that is the best, because none of us want to follow the second best. We're not jerks, So our thing is always the best, isn't it? Yeah. Even in our daily life, my opinion about where the spatula goes is always the best opinion. So, so as you get to know people of other traditions, sometimes they will ask you questions that are kind of surprising to you, because you had no idea that this is what they were learning about your tradition. And yet, what we are told about the other traditions we think is true. But when they say funny things about our tradition, then we say, oh, well, yeah, that's because da, 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 da. Okay, so I'll give you an example of some of those misconceptions. And you'll meet people that really believe them, and you'll be taught some of the misconceptions too. Okay, so Theravada tradition, Pali tradition, yeah, they're selfish. Yeah, because they want to become arhats. They're only looking out for their own liberation. They don't care for sentient beings. Yeah. That's where that line comes of spit on them. But it wasn't talking about spitting on those people. It's on when we cherish our own liberation more than the situation of other living beings, more than the aspiration for a full awakening. Okay, so that's the thing. Yeah, those people are selfish. The Theravada people look at the Mahayana people and say, those people are believing things that aren't even written in the sutras. Yeah. When people say that to me, I say, for my own study, well, what I just told you, they're built on the same ideas as the Theravada. And then also, as Nagarjuna said, talking about great compassion for all living beings, what is negative about that? Yeah? Whether it's taught by the Buddha or not, what is negative? And if it's something positive, why wouldn't the Buddha talk about it? Yeah? So that's one misunderstanding. Now, Mahayana people, their things are they're made up. Yeah, apocrypha. The Chinese and the Theravadas, everybody looks at the Tibetans. They practice magic. And they also practice an impure form of Buddhism because they practice Tantra, so they have sex and they drink. That's their whole practice. That's not my experience, thank goodness. But, people will come and, even distinguished masters of other traditions and say, is it true that the monks and nuns don't keep the first precept to remain celibate? And I have to say, well, if you're really a monk or a nun, you are celibate. Yeah. If you're somebody who was a monk and a nun, and you're not practicing properly in it, you're not disrobing after you had sex, then, that's a whole other case. That person isn't actually a monastic, even though those people might put on robes, Okay, as for magic, no. But I think because, especially in China, the emperors would often call for different Tibetan monastics to come. And there was actually, at a certain point, starting what century? I don't know, somewhere around the 17th, 18th century, like Tibetan monks permanently living in Beijing who would regularly do pujas for the emperor. Yeah, and for good crops, for prosperity in the country, things like this. And so when things turned out well, then the Tibetans got the reputation for doing magic. And, Tibetans do all this kind of stuff. But it's very interesting. The people who look and say that the Tibetans do magic, in their traditions, they also have very similar practices. Okay, the practices of wearing amulets. Now, if you go to Thailand, the Tibetans practice magic, but their monks have blessed strings, they have amulets, they have blessed water. Yeah, same thing. So it's interesting, and a lot of that is just human nature's like human nature wanting external objects to make you feel safe. Yeah. And there are holy beings in all the traditions who can do certain things, but the Tibetans just got known for doing magic. I was giving a talk one time in Knoxville, Tennessee, and to a college class. And one student raised their hand and said, in our textbook, when it was talking about Tibetan Buddhism, it said that they practice magic. Do you practice magic? Will you tell us about it? This is in a college textbook. Okay. When I would walk around Singapore more than once, somebody would stop and say, "What is my lucky number?" Yeah, because I want to buy a lottery ticket. Tell me what my lucky number is. And I remember one time in a park, I'm walking, one man stopped me, and I said, "I have no idea." He said, "Oh, come on, you know." And he kept pushing and pushing that I should give him his lucky number. I could not do that. Yeah. So you deal with these different misconceptions that people have about each other's traditions. The Tibetans think that the Chinese just do blank-minded meditation, okay, because of the Samye debate, which actually some modern scholars even question. Yeah. So it's well, the point is you have to study and learn for yourself. You have to discriminate for yourself. And don't form rigid negative opinions about other traditions that you know nothing else about except what you've heard in rumors. I gave a talk once in North Carolina, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "Wow, you couldn't have given that talk unless you meditated." And I heard Galupa people didn't meditate. They only study. That's another rumor, okay? That's certainly not true. Okay, so just, be aware that that's there. Don't get hung up in it. You don't have to depend any, kind of put your energy into, don't you dare think that about my tradition. Yeah. Okay, so in terms, let's go back to the Vinaya. So you wound up having these 18 different schools. Some of them, as time went on, merged with other schools. Some of them died out, yeah, maybe due to war or to famine or who knows what. And in the, what century was it? Around 11th century, early 12th century. India was invaded by nobody else but the Aryans, I always find that hysterical, that they invaded India. No, I'm sorry, the Aryans were the original people who came to India very early on. It was the Muslims, or some people say the Muslims, other people say the Mongols, okay? But they were foreign people who came to India. And because Buddhism was really concentrated in the monasteries and not so much practiced at home and in other places, then when they destroyed the monasteries and burned the books, it kind of almost wiped out Buddhism in India. Pockets remained, of course, but it was really, it was horrible for what happened. And then you had different times, you had the story that I just told you about the Mahavihara tradition in Sri Lanka. In Tibet, you had King Dharma, no, what's his name? Long Dharma. I knew it was Long Dharma something. Long Dharma. So he was in the 7th, 8th century. Yeah. Anyway, in a very short period of time, he made all the monasteries close, and the ordination lineage was broken, and so a few Tibetan monks went to the east and met some Chinese monks, and together they had enough, because just with the Tibetans themselves, they didn't have enough to give the ordination. When they had some Chinese monks join them, then they had enough monks to start the ordination lineage again. Okay. What's very interesting, I wrote a paper about this for one conference, is it looks like, the Tibetan monks who went had Mula Sravastivada ordination. That's one of the 18 schools. The Chinese monks had Dharmaguptaka ordination. But together they gave the ordination, and it was given as a Mula Sravastivada ordination. So then those monks went back to Tibet and spread that lineage back there. But one of their arguments nowadays about why they can't have bhikshunis in Tibet, the people who don't want it, is that you need both bhikshus and bhikshunis to give the ordination, and there are no Mula Sravastivada bhikshunis. And if you take Dharmadukataka bhikshunis, and you can't mix Vinaya traditions. What's interesting about that is the Buddha didn't teach Mula Sravastivada. He didn't teach he didn't even teach in the languages of Pali and Sanskrit. He didn't teach Dharmaguptaka. He didn't teach regular Sravastivada. He didn't teach Mahasangika. He didn't teach any of the 18 schools. He taught the Dharma. Those 18 schools were evolved historically through sentient beings. Okay. So if you look at it like that all the Vinayas originate with the Buddha, and His Holiness himself says that, and if you look, it's really remarkable that considering these things were passed down orally, that they have so much in common. Yeah, the listing of the precepts, so much in common. It's not wildly diverse precepts at all. Okay. So those Banakas did a very good job. Okay, so why don't I pause here, because we're almost at finishing time, and you may have some questions.
I have a specific question on the Vinaya traditions. Suppose that we have like 10 bhikshunis here, and we have 9 fully ordained bhikshus from the Dharmaguptaka, and then we need another one to do full ordination. And suppose that a monk requests to come to the Abbey and join us, but he is from the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya.
Oh, scandalous.
Yeah, but he has been ordained for more than 10 years.
Yes.
So could he take the vows from the Dharmaguptaka and still keep his 10 years of ordination, and then could we
You're going to
ordain?
get different answers from different people about that in terms of how closely they hold to different lineages. But the one saving grace in that is you need 10 in an area where Buddhism is flourishing. You only need 5 in an outlying area. So if you look at here as an outlying area, because I wouldn't call this a Buddhist country by any means, then you could make the case that you only need 5 bhikshus and 5 bhikshunis, in which case, according to your example, you would have that all, if you did it in the Mula Sravastivada tradition, you would have it all like that. Here at the Abbey, we're using the Dharma Guptaka, and it's just, it's so much easier for us as people who are starting out in a new country, because both those lineages for bhikshus and bhikshunis exist in the Dharma Guptaka. So you don't have to get involved in all of these debates and all this kind of stuff. You take your ordination there, you bring it here, you give it. Of course, some people look at that ordination and say, oh, but the lineage was broken, And then there's disputes about the history, because at one point, one of the emperors said that the nuns were no longer allowed to go to the monks' monasteries for ordination. So, that meant that some nuns gave the ordination just themselves and did it. There were monks who gave the ordination just by themselves to the nuns, but they couldn't have the dual ordination. So some people say, hey, well, you broke the lineage. Other people say, but the Buddha, when he first gave ordination to the women, actually, and this is in the different varieties of texts, of Vinaya texts, is some say that he just gave the ordination to Mahaprajapati Gautami, and then she alone, plus 10 bhikshus, gave it to the remainder. Some say that the Buddha gave all 500 nuns the ordination himself. There's all sorts of different versions of this, But, So, you could get all tied up in this kind of argument, or you could just say the Buddha taught the Vinaya and all the traditions are pretty much the same, okay? What we're doing here is we want to do the ordinations as much as possible, as much as feasible, so that nobody else can criticize it. We don't want to get involved with, well, there were only 9 bhikshus at your ordination, so we don't want to get involved in that kind of argument, okay? Did that answer your question okay? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, what I wanted to say is the Buddha, when he set up that the nuns should receive ordination from both the monks and the nuns, he never rescinded what he had previously said, which was that the monks alone could give the ordination. So some people say, well, he never rescinded that. So having the monks alone give women ordination is in compliance with the Dharma. Other people say, well, he started out like that, then he changed policies, so we have to go with the later way. But then the first group says, but he never said you couldn't still do it by the monks alone. Okay? So people have many different ideas. Yeah. My theory, okay, and this goes not only for the Vinaya discussion, but from most things, is, and this is only my theory, is that people first figure out what they believe, and then they find scriptures to validate what they believe. Yeah. And the same goes in Christianity too, I mean, surely you can find some kind of text in whatever tradition that would, you pick out some line and they said this, and then you expand on that line and it, there you go.
Venerable, you spoke about the levels of ordination, and you said Sharamanera, Shikshamana, and Bhikshuni
For the women.
for the woman.
Yeah.
I wonder where is the Anagarikas and what does Sharamanera and Shikshamana means?
Okay. So I'm going to get into that next talk I give. Okay. Talking about the different levels and the different precepts. Okay. This will be the last question.
Were the 5 lay precepts not given until the Buddha started giving, like 12 years after he started making precepts for monastics?
No, I think they must have been given before. Yeah, I would think so. I've never learned, they don't talk much about the evolution of the 5 precepts when they came and things like that I know of, but I'm not a scholar on all of that. You're making a face, do you know? No, Kenra.
I remember the story of the Queen Maya, that she observed 8 precepts during conceive of the Prince Siddhartha. So I thought that there is a tradition that being observed. I'm not very clear about it.
Say that again?
The Queen Maya actually observed 8 precepts when she had Prince Siddhartha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that was before the Buddha's sasana, so maybe it was an ancient Indian thing. I haven't heard that. But that would certainly, she would be celibate and she had a baby. So you're getting into Jesus again, okay? And Mary and, those people. So, but, in Buddhism, there's the story too that she dreamt of an elephant entering her, and the Buddha actually was born from her side as she held a branch of a tree. What? Spontaneously. Yeah. It must have hurt if he came. Anyway,